Right, so the news dominating headlines today has been that yet another of Keir Starmer's highest quality election candidates, and now an MP, has proven to be anything but, as now former Health Minister and MP for Gorton and Denton Andrew Gwynne has had WhatsApp posts he had made which were racist, anti-Semitic, sexist and just plain deeply unpleasant, leaked. It is one thing to think such things, but it is quite another to be so mind-bogglingly stupid as to write them down in a WhatsApp message and imagine they wouldn't get out. Gwynne might have done well to cast his mind back to a certain investigation Starmer was forced to launch when he first became leader, which led to the publication of the Ford Report eventually, for one, much of the evidence for that having been based on WhatsApp messages getting leaked. Gwynne is rightfully getting panned. Being sacked as a minister for what he has done does not go far enough. Quite honestly, though, he should be forced out as an MP. But what this has also done is highlight the hypocrisy in Starmer's ranks, because where he's given the impression of doing the right thing when it comes to Gwynne, so many others have gotten away with truly awful behaviour. So it begs to question all the more, quite honestly, about what Gwynne's real crime was, and who did he really upset in which case. Right, so the leak of WhatsApp messages to the Daily Mail of all sources, written by Andrew Gwynne, disgusting as they are, has seen him rightfully removed from post as a health minister. Wishing pensioners dead for not having voted Labour, claiming Diane Abbott doing Prime Minister's questions was down to Black History Month, and when someone asked whether David Lammy was not available, or even the corpse of Bernie Grant, Gwynne replied suggesting Tory MP Desmond Swayne or Canadian PM Justin Trudeau instead of Abbott, both of whom having been condemned previously for going blackface. Gwynne also asked in the group chat whether a visiting Jewish American psychologist was Mossad. These presumably are the ones the Mail felt comfortable publishing, but you can imagine there must have been worse. His removal, obviously, is a welcome move by Keir Starmer. Nobody conducting themselves like this should be anywhere near a position of responsibility or power, let alone be an MP. But he was Starmer's pick in July, wasn't he? Starmer was completely heavy-handed over candidate selections going into that general election. And running that election campaign was a man who is now Starmer's chief of staff and many suspect handler, Morgan McSweeney. Of course, McSweeney will have had a say in candidate selections. The man's wife, Imogen Walker, is an MP after all. So is it he who seems to be at the heart of everything in Starmer's Labour, the one Gwynne has upset somewhere along the lines, so that it actually matters this time and something actually does get done? Look at it this way. The only way we found out about any of this is because it got leaked to a rancid right-wing rag. So this was not the result of any number of other MPs or Labour councillors who shared that WhatsApp group with Gwynne. He wasn't talking to himself after all, was he? So they knew what he was saying. It wasn't any of them that have done this. What he has been saying goes back years at that. Abbott did PMQs under Corbyn when he led, of course, so this isn't a new or recent group being created. And yet none of them, over however long Gwynne was making such appalling comments, said anything about him through official Labour Party channels. It therefore smacks of a damage limitation exercise to leak all of this to the press, for whatever reason now, so that there can be no blowback on anyone else in the party. Unless, of course, you think about it for a while and come to the conclusion that I have here, that further investigation is obviously required. Will the party move against any more MPs and councillors that are in that group? Because if they don't, it's going to look pretty dodgy. And it's going to look all the more like Gwynne has done something to upset somebody here. For all we know, more leaks and revelations are going to come out of this latest Labour scandal, though, so we will have to wait and see on that. But we should be told who else was in that group and having a laugh, presumably, at Gwynne's conduct and the posts he's been making. If this doesn't happen, though, and let's face it, it's been going on long enough that obviously it has been buried up until now, it's going to be even more damaging for Labour going forwards. It will be seen as throwing Gwynne to the wolves for whatever reason, having proven himself an idiot. You can imagine Team Keith don't see him as a great loss if this is what he thought he could get away with. But others in that group might be. That said, he's still an MP, though. That in and of itself isn't good enough either. However, to force his resignation would likely see Labour lose that seat in a subsequent by-election, something Labour, we know, are trying to avoid at all costs from happening. And we know this because Starmer is desperately trying to keep Runcorn MP Mike Amesbury in place after he pleaded guilty to assault and awaits sentencing on that. The possibility of Amesbury facing a custodial sentence, which could likely trigger a recall petition, trying to be averted, Because, of course, Parliament must vote through their censure, how much they decide they want to punish Amesbury for his conduct. And if Starmer whips his MPs to essentially let him off, a short suspension rather than one which passes the recall threshold, it would avoid any by-election at all, and a convicted thug would remain an MP even if he happens to end up in jail. The drawback to Starmer's desperation to avoid by-elections he knows he will lose is that come the general election, everything Amesbury and everything Gwynne has said will be all over rival election leaflets. Aside from Labour being about as popular as a dose of the clap right now, that would be even more damaging and smacks of pure cowardice, and also, despite the suspensions and the sacking as a minister here, will not be seen as going far enough. But avoiding doing what should be done, what clearly needs to be done, forcing them out to allow people to select someone better to represent them in Parliament, which will elicit claims that Labour don't believe in punishing such behaviour as a consequence. Frankly, that would be true as well. A suspension from the party as both Gwynne and Amesbury have right now just means them sitting as an independent for, a few months before quietly being readmitted to the party. They should both be expelled. How many members has Starmer been happy to expel over the last couple of years? After all, the purge of the anti-Semites, for an example. Well, look at Gwynne's comments. You might have missed one here then, mightn't you? But also look at how many people have gotten away with poor conduct in Labour too, simply because they are Starmer's sort and get protected and get treated differently. I mean, take Gwynne's health department boss Wes Streeting, for example, who once tweeted out about shoving a male journalist under a train and was allegedly caught screaming in Diane Abbott's face in a corridor at one point as well. I mean, it's one thing for Gwynne to wish a pensioner dead, but Streeting threatened to do the killing. Coming back to the matter of members' expulsions, though, whilst MPs get preferential treatment and protection, as seems clearly the case once more here, from a Frit Starmer running scared of voters again, and I'd point you to just how many areas Labour have managed to get local elections suspended in this year, if you doubt that. He's terrified of voters right now. Democracy scares him no end. So much of it was done on the basis of racism, especially anti-Semitism, which was treated as a bigger issue than any other form of racism. Racist in itself. And yet here is a WhatsApp containing anti-Semitic messages from a Starmer minister showing that instead of getting on top of that racism with all the plaudits from the usual suspects, the pro-Israel organisations that claim to represent Jewry, Labour has utterly failed to actually do that. Having weaponised the issue, the hierarchy of racism in the Labour Party as it was described in the Ford report, detailing many recommendations for Labour to improve, clearly have not been. And the plaudits Starmer won for getting on top of the issue were false ones, clearly in an attempt, it seems, to set aside the issue, having used it successfully, weaponised it to remove Jeremy Corbyn, and we are seeing this happen again now. And since we brought up Corbyn here, GBB's mouthpiece Alex Armstrong, for example, decided to go for a 2-for-1 hit job over Gwynne by attacking Corbyn again, whilst cheering for Boris Johnson at the same time by tweeting out a video clip accompanied by a caption reading, "Andrew Gwynne, now former minister and Corbyn's ex-head of campaigns, had this infamous interview where he constantly goaded Boris Johnson, invaded his personal space, and of course tried to press him on the winter fuel allowance. Not sure he's somebody I'd put in my cabinet." Oh, so Johnson wasn't racist at all then, was he? He wasn't the only one dragging Corbyn again either, as the Financial Times scribbler George Parker described Gwynne as a Corbyn ally, when Gwynne nominated Starmer for Labour leader in 2020 and wouldn't have stood a chance of selection if he was anything remotely the sort to be associated with Corbyn in truth. I especially want to talk about Labour Friends of Israel here as well. I might as well, because Gwynne is one of theirs. So explain how you have an apparent anti-Semite in your midst, guys. Anyone would think it's nothing to do with being Jewish, and of course it isn't really, is it? I'm sure he enjoyed his trips to the genocidal apartheid state enough, though. Starmer's Labour remains a racist endeavour, and I fully expect the party machine to try and keep Gwynne as an MP despite all of this, just like they're trying to keep Mike Amesbury one. Find out all about Amesbury's particular case, though, and what Labour were trying to do to protect themselves, tying themselves in knots, frankly, despite the most appalling of conduct in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content and help support the channel as well, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks.